There's a question nobody asks anymore. Why metal? Of all the things humans could have used as money, shells, beads, cattle, leather, why did metal win? And not just win temporarily. Metal dominated money for thousands of years. It built empires. It financed wars. It created social hierarchies that still exist today. The answer isn't what you think. Metal didn't become money because it was rare. It became money because it was violent, and once violence found its currency, civilization was never the same. Welcome to Gold Without Witness, where the stories they don't teach reveal the systems we can't escape. And today, we're digging into the one truth about money that changes everything else. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. This story connects us all, no matter where we are on the map. Before metal, early human societies had a completely different problem. It wasn't how to trade, it was how to remember. In villages and tribes, people exchanged favors constantly. You helped harvest my grain, I helped build your roof. You shared meat, I shared tools. This wasn't barter. This was mutual obligation. And it worked beautifully because everyone knew everyone. Memory was the ledger. Reputation was enforcement. Trust was automatic because abandonment meant death. But then came the shift. Populations exploded. Villages became towns. Towns became cities. Suddenly, you weren't dealing with your cousin. You were dealing with strangers. People you'd never see again. People who didn't care about your reputation because they weren't part of your network. The old system shattered. Memory couldn't scale. Obligation couldn't stretch across distances. And trust, real trust, became impossible. Here's what most people miss. The problem wasn't trade. Merchants could still negotiate. The problem was power. Rulers needed to move resources across vast territories. They needed to feed armies stationed hundreds of miles away. They needed to collect taxes from people they'd never meet. They needed to pay laborers who didn't care about the king's reputation. Goodwill doesn't build pyramids. Promises don't fund invasions. Power needed something tangible, durable, and universally intimidating. That's where metal entered history. Not as a convenience, as a solution to control. Metal had properties that made it irresistible to early states. But here's the part nobody emphasizes. The most important property wasn't economic, it was military. Metal was the material of weapons. Bronze swords, iron spears, copper shields. Whoever controlled metal controlled violence. And whoever controlled violence controlled everything else. Think about what that meant. When a ruler demanded taxes payable in metal, they weren't just collecting wealth. They were collecting the raw material of their own dominance. Every ingot surrendered was a weapon they could forge. Every coin minted was a blade that didn't end up in rebel hands. Taxation in metal wasn't just extraction. It was disarmament. The peasant who handed over bronze couldn't use that bronze to fight back. This is the strange reason metal became money. It wasn't chosen because it was shiny or divisible or portable, though those helped. It was chosen because it was dangerous. And once danger could be measured, stored, and redistributed, power became something entirely new. Permanent, scalable, exponential. But there's more. Metal had another quality that made it perfect for control. It was hard to fake but easy to verify. You couldn't grow metal like grain. You couldn't breed it like livestock. You had to mine it, smelt it, refine it. That took labor, infrastructure, and expertise. All things states could monopolize. When a government minted coins, they weren't just creating currency. They were creating something only they could produce at scale. Money became proof of centralized power, and that proof was forged in fire. Early rulers understood something modern economists often forget. Scarcity isn't natural. Scarcity is enforced. Metal was scarce because mining was controlled, distribution was controlled. And once you controlled both, you controlled the entire population's access to the thing they now needed to survive. You didn't need to threaten people constantly. You just needed to make metal mandatory, and survival would force compliance. This is when societies crossed a threshold. The moment taxes became payable only in metal, subsistence economies died. People who had lived outside markets for generations were suddenly dragged into them. They had to sell their crops, their labor, their time, not because they wanted to trade, but because the state demanded payment in a form they didn't produce. Markets didn't emerge naturally. They were created by force, quietly, systematically, and irreversibly. Metal was powerful. But stamped metal was revolutionary. When the first coins appeared in Lydia, around 600 BCE, something profound shifted. A piece of metal with a king's face wasn't just currency. It was propaganda you carried in your pocket. Every time you looked at a coin, you saw authority. Every transaction reinforced who ruled. Every payment was a micro-submission to the system. Coins did something brilliant and sinister. They replaced personal trust with institutional trust. Before coins, you had to trust the person you were trading with. You had to verify weight, purity, authenticity. It was slow. It was personal. It was inefficient. Coins eliminated that. You no longer trusted the merchant. You trusted the stamp. And the stamp belonged to the state. This was the birth of abstraction in value. And abstraction is where power hides. When you trust a symbol instead of a person, you stop asking who benefits. When you accept a coin because it has the right image, you stop questioning who decided that image matters. Authority becomes invisible. Obedience becomes automatic. The system feels natural even when it's constructed entirely around control. Rulers immediately recognize the opportunity. If people would accept stamped metal without question, you could manipulate that metal, reduce silver content, clip edges, issue more coins than reserves justified. Spending increased. Consequences were delayed. Inflation wasn't discovered in modern times. It was invented the moment rulers realized they could debase currency and survive the fallout, at least temporarily. Ancient Rome perfected this. As the empire expanded, costs exploded, armies grew, bureaucracies swelled, infrastructure crumbled. The solution wasn't to tax more directly, that risked rebellion. The solution was to quietly reduce the silver content in coins. A denarius that once contained 95% silver dropped to 50%, then 5%. Most people didn't notice immediately. Inflation crept slowly. Prices rose gradually. Trust eroded invisibly. By the time citizens understood what happened, the emperor who ordered debasement was long dead. Sound familiar? Modern central banks don't melt coins anymore. They adjust interest rates. They expand balance sheets. They print liquidity. Different language. Same mechanism. Same delay between decision and consequence. The people who manage money today aren't more corrupt than Roman emperors. They're facing the same impossible trade-off. Maintain stability or fund obligations. Preserve trust or prevent collapse. There's rarely a choice that satisfies both. This is why monetary crises aren't anomalies. They're built into the structure. Money was designed to move value efficiently through systems built around power. When stress increases, efficiency breaks down. The system bends, sometimes quietly, sometimes catastrophically, but never randomly. The logic is consistent, the incentives are predictable, and history keeps proving the pattern holds. Here's what most people misunderstand about money. They think it evolved to be fair, efficient, neutral. It didn't. Money evolved to be scalable, and scalability has always favored centralized power. That's not a flaw. That's the design. Metal money taught civilizations a lesson they never forgot. Value doesn't have to be real. It just has to be enforceable. A coin's worth wasn't inherent in the metal. It was inherent in what happened if you refused it. Reject the king's currency, face consequences. Question the system, lose access. Complain too loudly, discover enforcement. This is the legacy we inherited. Today's money doesn't clink in pockets, but it operates on identical logic. Currencies aren't backed by metal anymore. They're backed by obligation, taxation, and force. You must pay taxes. You must accept legal tender. You must participate in the system. Choice is an illusion. Compliance is mandatory, just like it was when metal first became money. Understanding this changes everything. Inflation isn't mysterious. It's what happens when authorities face impossible demands and limited options. Debt crises aren't failures. They're features of systems designed to smooth power across time. Financial collapses aren't aberrations. They're what happens when the gap between abstraction and reality becomes too wide to ignore. Real financial literacy doesn't come from learning how to invest. It comes from understanding what money was built to do and what it was never designed to provide. Money can measure value. It can store labor. It can coordinate massive economies. But it cannot guarantee fairness. It cannot prevent manipulation. And it cannot protect people who mistake its stability for neutrality. From bronze blades to digital dollars, the story is consistent. Money didn't emerge to help people. It emerged to help power. And once power became portable, measurable, and accumulable, it reshaped civilization permanently. We live inside that reshaping. Every paycheck, every price tag, every transaction, all of it runs on logic forged thousands of years ago when someone realized violence needed a currency. The strangest part? We still call it progress. We still teach children that money makes life easier, fairer, more civilized. We ignore the coercion embedded in every coin. We forget that markets were forced into existence. We pretend the system evolved naturally when it was constructed deliberately by people with weapons demanding obedience. This isn't a call to reject money. You can't. None of us can. The system is too deep, too embedded, too essential. But you can stop pretending it's neutral. You can stop believing it serves you equally. You can recognize where you stand inside a structure built to extract value efficiently upward and ask the only question that matters. Knowing what money really is, how do I protect what's mine? History doesn't repeat. But power always finds a currency. And once you see that clearly, you stop wondering why the system behaves the way it does. You start preparing for what it does next. If this changed how you see money, subscribe. Because the logic never stops. And neither do we. Fledjong, 2000, in the pretty messes of subscribe.